Sweet. Okay. Well, hey everyone. First off, thanks so much for coming. Yeah, it's gonna be great. We have a really awesome presentation put together by one of our co-founders and coordinators, Tim, and we'll introduce him a little later. But I just wanted to say hello to everyone. My name is Brandon Dale, for those who I haven't met. I'm one of the co-founders for Kinfolk, as well as Greg, who will have him introduce himself as well.
Hi, I'm Greg Whalen, also another co-founder of Kinfolk. Awesome to see you all. We're coming at you live from duck camp, so very relevant presentation.
Yeah. So this is really just like an introduction to waterfowling, and so it's made really for folks who maybe had like almost no exposure, or maybe you've gone on like a guided duck hunt and weren't really sure what's going on, or just want to sort of learn about the basics of what and how, excuse me, you sort of think about waterfowling. A little bit about Kinfolk before we get into that. So we're a relatively new nonprofit. We've been doing work here in New York State for the past 4 or 5 years, but formalized in the past 6 months. Really trying to look at trying to get new people into the outdoors, particularly through mentored hunting and fishing programs, and really connecting the new wave of hunter conservationists in the outdoors by doing these sort of mentor hunts, educational seminars, and events such as this to really get like new audiences into the outdoors. So thank you all so much for coming. And basically, I'm going to keep this pretty short because I know Tim has an excellent presentation. But a little bit of context, if anyone wants to get more involved in terms of either going to events, we have a link posted in the chat that was there for signing up on our listserv. So if you're here and you've registered, you'll get our emails for all future events, but then also feel free to email either Brandon at kinfolkhunting.com, Greg at kinfolkhunting.org, or info at kinfolkhunting.org, and you'll be able to get in contact with us. So if you're interested in partnering, or anything like that, we're all ears and very much so in the process of like starting to build Kinfolk out. And so this is one of many events. It's going to be recorded. And so the presentation and things of that nature, I'll let Tim talk about in terms of details. But basically, after this, we'll have some time for Q&A. But again, if anyone has any questions, we're actually actively at a duck camp right now. We're here in northern Maine. We've been duck hunting for the past like 4 days, 3 days, and yeah, I mean it's been great. Like we just cleaned ducks for like 8 hours and geese, and we have a freezer and a refrigerator full of ducks and geese, and it's been really awesome. So with that, I will kick it over to our amazing presenter. Timothy Clark, who is a waterfowl extraordinaire with his incredible son and sidekick, and all things duck collector, Cedar. Yeah, and Tim really does an incredible job of really laying out the basics and foundations of how to think about waterfowling. That's from gear to finding access to sort of thinking about like what and how and why you're in certain places for certain birds. But really, like this is a pretty casual like presentation, and so like we'll have time for conversation and Q&A after. But if you have questions during the chat, please just drop them into the actual Zoom room. We will respond, and then we'll also have room and time for at the end for more Q&A. But with that, I will kick it over to Tim with a huge round of applause and a little hail call series, which is a duck call that you'd bring in to the ducks that are flying in your area that you want to try to get them to come down. And if they're like flying away, you're trying to get them to turn and basically look at your decoys to come into the spread. So without further ado. Thank him, Tim.
All right, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Brandon, for that introduction and overzealous calling as per usual. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Tim Clark. I live in Brooklyn, New York, but I hunt all throughout the Northeast. A lot of places. Good. I'm glad you didn't hear any of that calling because none of us want to. I can promise you that. My sidekick, he's laying down now, but Cedar, and I'm going to tell him he can go. You're all right. Go play. Because he's done sitting next to me. He's sat next to me a lot for the last 3 days. But as Brandon mentioned, I'm going to be giving an introduction today that is all about waterfowl hunting 101. So this is really a primer for those who aren't familiar with waterfowl hunting and some of the rules and regulations and even what waterfowl are. And so we'll get into that and how you can get started hunting. All right, go. Sorry, he's off on his own. I will say, feel free to throw questions into the chat. I will do my best to respond to them as they come up. But similarly, if you have a question or a thought, feel free to just come off mute and shout it out. So I will go ahead and pull up the presentation. Maybe I can. All right. I think everybody can probably see my screen. One moment while I go into presenter mode. Can everybody see my screen? Cool. All right. Thumbs up from the crowd in front. One sec, I got to move the Zoom menu because it's always in the way. All right. So, waterfowl hunting 101. What we're going to cover today. So, what are waterfowl? An important question. What laws should I be aware of? So, what are the rules and regulations that will govern waterfowl hunting? And then, what gear do I need? And where can I go? And how do I get started? And then, we're going to hold some time at the end just for question and answers. And so we can field any thoughts, questions that might come up. Now, I'm going to start here. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. It's going to feel messy. When you go waterfowl hunting, it will often feel like this. It feels like you are literally in a sinkhole. That's okay. Don't get overwhelmed by this presentation. We are going to be posting this up on the website so you can come back to it. You can refer to it. But similarly, we've got a great group of mentors at Kinfolk Hunting Collective. And so I would really encourage everyone to reach out to the mentors so that they can get more insights, more follow-up conversations on any questions that might be coming up in the wake of this presentation. I'm going to add another note. So whitetail hunting or other types of hunting, if you're familiar with it, if you've done some of our programs in the past, it feels like this on the left. It's very calming. You go out in the woods, you might not see much. It can feel like a Zen garden. Waterfowl hunting, what you're going to see in the presentation, is going to feel like a hoarder's cabin. It's going to be overwhelming. It leads you to buying a lot of gear. Before you know it, you're getting a dog to help you with your hunting. So I want to just kind of provide a note of caution that this might seem like a lot when we get into the gear section, but know that there's ways to ease into it. And so we're going to hopefully facilitate that in a way that it feels a little bit less of what's happening on the right and a little bit more of what's happening on the left. So we're going to start really, really broad. So what are waterfowl? We're going to cover what are waterfowl types, what are their migration patterns, and what are their behavior. When people think of waterfowl, they might think of ducks. Fair, that's a type of waterfowl. You might think of Canada geese. But all of these other birds fall under the kind of guidelines of what qualifies as waterfowl in the state of New York. There are other birds that would be considered waterfowl, but we're really focusing on waterfowl hunting today. And so this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about waterfowl hunting. We're talking about ducks, Canada geese, mergansers, coots, scaup, which are a type of sea duck, brant, and snow geese. These as a whole, that entire group is what in New York State would be considered waterfowl. The other common element between all of these birds is that they need this to live. So they will always live some part of their life on or adjacent to water. The other qualifying kind of distinction about waterfowl in this area is that they migrate. And so this is a diagram that is showing the different flyways, meaning that think of them as like aerial highways that these birds will take up and down the coast and throughout the country to basically meet their annual needs. So that is breeding and overwintering grounds. And so starting right to left, you can see shown by the kind of black bird diagram, that's the Atlantic flyway. There's the blue birds. Those fall under the Mississippi flyway. And then the red, that's the Pacific flyway. Did I mess that up? No, yeah, red is Pacific flyway, and then green is the Central flyway. That means basically birds will move up and down those corridors. And so generally speaking, you're not going to see a bird that shows up, let's say, over in Seattle, Washington, over in New York. They typically move back and forth in a north-south fashion. One of the most amazing things is the distances at which these birds migrate. Some waterfowl like brant, which you'll see out on Long Island Sound, in New York Harbor, they migrate thousands of miles between their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds. So there are birds that have been shot in Long Island that were previously reported up in Greenland. And so that just shows how incredible some of these animals are. The other thing that I'll kind of note is that you can see that some of the icons from the Atlantic flyway will cross over to other flyways. So there is some blending. It's not like a bird that lives its life in the Atlantic flyway can't move over to the Mississippi flyway. But this is a kind of good indicator and a good way for people who are looking at the health of these animals to understand how they move throughout their life. As I mentioned, there's really kind of two locations where birds will spend the majority of their time. So there's the breeding habitat, which is where they'll often spend their time in the summer. And so that's shown on the map to the right in red. And so that they'll generally move up to more northern latitudes, colder climates, and then they'll come down to us, shown in the blue fill over on that map, to spend their winters. And so that's what's called wintering habitat. The amazing thing is, if you want to learn more about specific species, say it's a mallard duck or a Canada goose, you can go better understand the range of those individual species by looking at publicly available maps. The Audubon Society, if you're familiar with it, they have some great interactive maps where you can look up those individual birds to get a better sense of how they move throughout the year. I provided the link there over on the left. And again, we're going to post this on the website, so no need to write this down. You can come back to it later. But I highly encourage everybody who's curious about what waterfowl hunting is to learn more about the individual birds you might be targeting to really understand how you would then hunt them. That said, when you're thinking about waterfowl in the context of hunting, people are generally thinking about, beyond geese, they're thinking about ducks. And ducks are kind of organized under these two larger umbrellas, either dabbling ducks. So when you think of a mallard duck, say in like Central Park, that's a dabbling duck, or a diving duck. What is the difference between those two? We'll start with dabbling ducks first. And before I kind of dive into some of the specifics, I provided icons, so images that show what are the dabbling ducks that we'll sometimes or often find in New York State. So you can see it's more than just the mallard, but we've also got black ducks, green-winged teal, wood ducks, blue-winged teal, gadwall, American widgeon, spoonbills. There's actually also pintails. I didn't put those in. But they all have their own preferences as far as what they eat, where they want to spend their time. And so I highly encourage everyone to as you get further and further into this, to really kind of nurture a sense of curiosity about the individual species, to then learn more about their life cycle to inform the way in which you might approach hunting. But as an overarching rule, what is the distinction between a dabbling duck and a diving duck? So a dabbling duck feeds by tipping their body over, like we saw in this image, and they submerge their head underwater and they stay up on the surface, but they're feeding in shallower water, looking for seeds. They might be looking for smaller crustaceans, but they generally feed on plant matter of some sort. That said, if you live in an area where there's agriculture, so if you go up into Hudson Valley, you can find these ducks feeding on agricultural crops like corn, rice, potatoes, and much more. Diving ducks, on the other hand, spend most of their life out on the water. And so they will be up on top of the surface, but then to feed, they'll actually dive underwater to find the food that they prefer. So you'll find them oftentimes in deeper water, so lakes, out in the middle of rivers or deeper streams, ponds, or even in offshore coastal waters. So you can go out into the middle of Long Island Sound or, a couple miles off the coast of Long Island, and you'll find these ducks out there. They won't come into the beach. They're going to stay pretty far out. But the big distinction here is that they'll eat seagrasses, they'll eat mollusks, which are basically shellfish, crabs, and fish. I'm going to add one more caveat to this, which is that when it comes to eating them, typically these are a little bit fishier tasting than their dabbling duck counterparts. So if you think about going to a restaurant and ordering a duck, it's generally a relative of a dabbling duck. You're not going to find diving ducks in a restaurant for myriad reasons. But that's just a note of caution. So if you're hoping to get something that you would find in a restaurant, I probably wouldn't start with a diving duck. The other thing I want to highlight is when it comes to hunting, you want to think about the way in which these animals move throughout their life. So I mentioned that kind of seasonal movements that they'll do from their breeding grounds down to their wintering grounds, but they also have a daily rhythm. In the world of hunting, we kind of bucket it under three categories. So there's what people will call roosting, which is where ducks will spend the night and they'll sleep. They're generally very secure, safe places. And so for a puddle duck, it could be the middle of a river or a secluded pond, somewhere where they don't feel like they're at threat of predation. For a sea duck, as I mentioned, it could be out in the middle of the ocean. So they might be many miles offshore, but they will go to places where they can kind of congregate, stay warm, relax, sleep. And then the rest of their time, they'll spend it either feeding or loafing. So feeding is fairly obvious. It's where they go to eat. And so the location depends on the species you're targeting. So as one example, a mallard might feed in a marsh, an agricultural field, or areas where there's aquatic vegetation. So generally on land or very shallow water areas. We were looking at these diving ducks before. There's a bunch here. We've got scoters, we've got mergansers. I'm going to come back. You're going to find those in areas where they have the food that they prefer, oftentimes shellfish beds. And so that takes a little bit more digging, looking at marine maps, local knowledge, talking to people in the area to figure out where they're going. The other kind of category of how these animals will spend their time is what people call loafing. And that's generally an area where they'll go between feeding and the roost. So either after they've fed and then before they go to the roost, or sometimes after they leave the roost and before they go to feed. It's an area where they can kind of relax, digest, they feel secure, but they're not going there to sleep. It's kind of just to hang out. Think of it as like the duck's version of sitting on the couch. Now, you're going to look at the previous section and be like, this keeps getting more and more complicated as we're going. And that is the reality of waterfowl hunting. I think it's also one of the most amazing things about it is that there's so much to learn. And I can say myself, and I think I can speak on behalf of others, that that's one of the things that we love is that the further you get into it, the more you're learning, the more complexity you realize there is. That doesn't mean that it's complicated to get started, but there's a really beautiful complexity that at times can feel like a Russian nesting doll. And that will especially apply when we're talking about rules and regulations. I also, again, I'm just going to caveat that this is going to seem really complicated. Um, and it's going to feel like this. It's going to feel like you're in a sinkhole, you're floundering in the mud. Again, you don't have to remember all of this. This is going to be something that you can come back to. And this is a thing that even people who duck hunt a lot, they're constantly revisiting the regulations to make sure that they're current on what's appropriate for that year. Now, as far as regulations, as I mentioned, they're complicated, but they're not that complicated. The big distinction between waterfowl hunting and, let's say, deer hunting is that regulations are created at both the federal and the state levels. The reason for that is that it's a reflection of the fact that a duck, unlike, let's say, a deer, is not going to spend its entire life in just New York State. It's going to spend some of its time in New York State. It's going to spend some of its time in Vermont, even up in Canada. So there's even coordination that happens between US Fish and Wildlife Service and the equivalent up in Canada to basically manage the populations. And so because of that, there are some regulations that come down from the federal level and some that come down at the state level. As a rule of thumb, the federal agencies set the broad outlines of what is allowed for migratory bird hunting. So that is to say, what is the allowable window for a season? So when a season can occur within a year and how many days are allowed for that season. Then they say, what are the species that can or can't be hunted? What are the bag limits for each species, meaning the number of ducks that can be taken on a day? And what are some kind of overarching gear restrictions that will apply regardless of where you are in the US? A state agency, like DEC in New York State, will add additional specificity to the regulations, including specific season dates, so like the literal day it starts and ends. And then it will also provide additional clarity to the regulations. So it might outline areas that are closed to waterfowl hunting. They can sometimes add additional bag limit restrictions, and they might also add on additional state specific regulations. And so it's really important that you read those over to get a sense of what is or is not allowed. The other thing I'll add is that municipalities, so a town or a city, may also have their own regulations, especially around areas that are closed to hunting. And so waterfowl, and this is I think a thing that's quite similar actually to whitetail deer hunting. But before you go hunting in a place, you need to see whether or not, especially if you're hunting on public land, whether it's allowed by that town. So, as I mentioned, um, waterfowl regulations in New York, they're outlined every year. So 1 year's regulations do not carry over to, let's say, the next hunting season. And so they're normally issued separately from normal hunting regulations. They'll come out typically in the summer, oftentimes in July. Um, excuse me. The other thing I'll say is that you can of course visit the DEC's website. It's a great resource, but I highly recommend reading the PDF version of the New York Migratory Game Birds regulations because it lists out everything all in one place. With the website, you'll find some information here, some information is on the next page. And so I find it easiest when it comes time to really understand what are the regulations for a season, what are the season dates for, let's say, Long Island versus Hudson Valley. I'll refer to that PDF to get a sense of what's happening because there is that additional level of specificity. And so if you're interested in learning more and looking through some of those regulations, I provided a QR code on this upper right-hand corner that will take you directly to that PDF. Now I'm going to cover some universals, and this really applies to any state that you might be duck hunting in. So, first of all, you must have a federal duck stamp. I'm going to get into that in a second. Some states also will require a state duck stamp. New York does not. You must complete a harvest information program questionnaire for each state that you hunt in. That's another thing I'm going to come back to. You must use a non-toxic shot material, meaning basically any shot material that's approved for waterfowl hunting. Another way of putting it is you can't use lead. Um, People might use lead for pheasant hunting, for squirrel hunting, but it is illegal to use lead when you're hunting waterfowl. Again, that is universal. That is a federal regulation. That does not come from the state. Perfect. Thank you, Brandon. Um, the other thing is your shotgun cannot hold more than 3 shells. I put an asterisk there because that can sometimes change for certain goose seasons. And so once again, it's important that you read the regulations to understand that. But my advice to you is assume that you can't hunt with more than 3 shells. And that is not I've only got 3 shells in my gun, but your gun can physically not hold more than 3 shells. So that really only applies if you're hunting with a semi-automatic shotgun or a pump shotgun, because they can oftentimes hold more than those. And so these guns will often have what's called a plug, which will basically prevent you from putting in more than 3 shells at once. The other thing is you can't shoot more birds than the daily bag limit allows. Meaning, if in we're in Maine right now, so if in Maine you can't shoot, you can only shoot 2 Canada geese a day. You can't go out and shoot 3. So that's just a good rule of thumb that again applies to any state that you might hunt in. The other thing is there's something called a possession limit in waterfowl hunting, which means you can't have at any given moment a certain number of birds higher than the possession limit. What qualifies as being in your possession? That could be as much as a duck that's in your freezer. The possession limit is typically 3 times the daily limit. So again, let's use the Canada goose limit as an example. So right now in Maine, the daily limit is 2 geese. I can't have 2 times 3, 6. Sorry, I had to do math. I can't have more than 6 Canada geese on me from multiple days of hunting. So I couldn't have 6 geese in the freezer and then go out goose hunting and get another 2 because I would then be exceeding my possession limit. So, what are the steps that you have to take to become a legal waterfowl hunter? Step number 1, you have to buy a duck stamp. So, I've provided a QR code to a duck stamp on the upper right. So, any migratory bird hunter that's at or over the age of 16 must possess a current signed federal duck stamp, along with state licenses and permits to hunt legally. You can also, as of last waterfowl hunting season, purchase an e-stamp. So it doesn't have to be that printed signed copy, but you can buy a qualifying e-stamp that you can have a copy of on your phone. That's what I do. I lose things a lot, and so I just keep things on my phone because I find it's easiest. You might be wondering why this is in existence. It's really a kind of beautiful story about conservation in the US. It was basically designed to raise money for the protection of waterfowl habitat. So when you buy a duck stamp, that money goes directly to the National Wildlife Refuge System, which are basically lands that are protected uh, for the purpose of conserving waterfowl habitat. It's an incredibly efficient way of raising money for that land protection work. And over 98% of the money raised from the sale of duck stamps goes directly to help acquire wetlands and conservation easements for that system that I mentioned. Um, Another fun fact is that I think it's the longest running federal art contest. Uh, and every year there's a contest for someone to paint, illustrate what you see in the lower left. And so every year you get to buy this new duck stamp. They're quite large. They're probably well, it depends on the size of your screen, I suppose. Um, but they're probably like 2.5 inches long and an inch or so high, and they're quite beautiful. It's nice. It's a fun way of kind of documenting the seasons over the years, and oftentimes people will actually collect them. So, oh, was there a question? No. All right. So the next step is when you go to buy your license, you have to complete HIP, which stands for Harvest Information Program. I mentioned that earlier, and it's basically a required questionnaire that must be completed prior to hunting in any state. What that means is you don't have to complete the questionnaire every time you go hunting, but if I'm about to start waterfowl hunting for the season in New York State, I've got to fill out this questionnaire, and then it will actually show up on your license. And so I've taken a screenshot of my license over on the left, and you can see, here are my active licenses and privilege. So I've got resident fishing, resident hunting, resident bow hunting, etc. And then down the bottom, there's something where you can see it's HIP, and you can see that it covers the dates of this hunting season. If you don't see that on your license, that means you haven't filled out that questionnaire, and that means you can't go waterfowl hunting yet legally in that state. And once again, you have to complete it for every state that you hunt in. Meaning, I come from New York State. I filled out HIP earlier this year to hunt New York State. I drove up to Maine earlier this week to hunt here, and I had to complete my HIP questionnaire when I purchased the license last week for Maine specifically. So, step 3, other legal things. As I mentioned, your shotgun cannot hold more than 3 shells. The shot type you use must be non-toxic, meaning lead is not allowed. So it could be steel, it could be bismuth, tungsten, and other approved shot materials. And then also there are legal distance requirements that determine how far you can hunt from an inhabited structure. So make sure to read the regulations to understand these because it does vary depending on exactly where you're hunting in New York State. All right, next up, I'm going to talk about gear. But before I jump in, is there any questions about regulations that people might have? Let's see, I see some stuff in the chat. Wow, none. I can't believe I nailed that. All right, amazing. Gear. this is either someone's favorite part of waterfowl hunting or most hated part, depending on whether or not you like purchasing gear. The way in which I'm going to talk about it today is I'm going to talk about it in kind of three categories. So there's what I would consider must-have gear. So what you absolutely must have if you want to go waterfowl hunting. Then there's nice to have, and then there's really nice to have. It's very easy to spend a lot of money in the sport. And so I'm going to try to break it down in a way that it doesn't feel so intimidating. No, you do not need to go out and buy a motorboat right away. I promise you. So, what is the must-have gear? So, you're going to need a shotgun. Generally speaking, people would recommend or a pump or a semi shotgun because that will be able to hold 3 shells. Um, They're also generally more affordable than, let's say, like an over-under shotgun or something a little bit fancier. And you can oftentimes buy them in like a synthetic stock, so basically not wood. Uh, and they will be able to withstand the abuse that they experience from waterfowl hunting. That is getting very wet, getting tossed around in a boat, and just kind of getting generally beaten up. You'll understand more as you get further and further into it. You need to have ammo. So as a starter, again, this is the must-have gear. This is not the nice to have. So I would say you need to have ammo, and I would say starting out, you should start with steel shot and get it in a waterfowl load. For ducks, you're typically going to use a number 2 shot size in steel, or if you're fancy and you want to use bismuth, it would be number 4. A typical shot size for geese, if that's what you're interested in, would be a BB shot size for steel or a number 2 for bismuth. What else do you need? You're going to need some kind of decoys, and I'll get into decoys in a second. You could really start with just like a half dozen, so 6 decoys, and you're going to need anchors if you're hunting in a water environment. You're also going to need a duck or a goose call. You couldn't hear Brandon, which again is probably for the best. But you'll see them, and let's see if I can pull myself up. So they're kind of funny looking things. I'm going to take it off my lanyard for a second. But they could be wood construction, they could be a plastic construction. And I understand you can't hear it, but basically what happens with the duck call is you just blow air through it and it makes a quacking noise. So you're basically, that's enough out of you. So you're basically able to kind of converse with the ducks to make it seem like your decoys are real, and so they'll come in. Similarly, excuse me, there are goose calls, and I'm not going to blow because you can't hear it, and I'm also terrible at goose caller. Um, and just like a duck call, you can use it to make a goose sound. The other thing you'll need is camo. So waterfowl have excellent eyesight. They can see color, they can see really extended distances, they can see movement quite well. And so if you're hunting for any type of bird, so turkeys, waterfowl, you need camo so that they can't see you. That's why I'm wearing camo right now. You need to stay hidden in some way, shape, or form, and camo is a good starting place for that. The other thing is because you're hunting in watery environments, you're going to want waders. Waterfowl hunting generally happens in colder months of the year. So let's say you're targeting geese. Oftentimes you're out hunting in November, December, January, very cold water. And so in order to stay safe and prevent things like hypothermia, you need to be wearing waders, which basically are waterproof overalls that will keep you dry and keep you warm. Typically, if you're going out to go and buy a pair and you're using them for duck hunting, you would buy what are called boot foot waders, which are waders where the boots are attached permanently to the wader. They're warmer than the alternative, which is called a stocking foot wader. And there's 2 options of waders. You can either go with a cheaper option, which is neoprene. Um, they're typically less expensive to buy, but they're much warmer. A more expensive option is a breathable wader, which is if you think of like a Gore-Tex or like a rain jacket, it's basically a beefier version of that material, but on your pants. The downside of those is while they are breathable, they have no insulation built in, generally speaking. And so you need to have some kind of underlayer on beneath them. Some other things, you're gonna need some way of retrieving the ducks. It could be you if you're hunting in a shallow environment, but people do use things like fishing rods with big treble hooks to cast over the birds and try to pull them in. Finally, you're gonna need a bag to carry your gear and just keep stuff dry, keep your ammo in it, keep your calls, hopefully some coffee. Um, the other, I guess this is not necessarily a must-have because you could really just kind of start with a single call, but oftentimes you'll see it's probably hard to see, but people will have lanyards where they have multiple calls on them, and so as you build up more and more calls, you'll be able to add them to a lanyard and just keep them around your neck, which is just really handy when you're out in the marsh and ducks come up and you can go call and then just drop it away and not have to worry about it. So the nice to have gear, more decoys. So I mentioned you could start off with as few as half a dozen decoys. Um, you can always buy more decoys. People could have really huge collections of decoys. Um, if you're a big Canada goose hunter, you might have dozens of goose decoys. Uh, if you're a big duck hunter, you might have decoys that are of specific species that you're targeting that could add variety to your spread. So if you remember earlier, I had those icons of all the different duck species. You could have decoys that reflect all of, um, oh, yes, thank you, Greg. Must have gear, hearing protection. Keep yourself safe. Definitely wear hearing protection. The other nice to have gear, so more calls. I don't use a lot of calls in part because I'm terrible at calling. But some people will have different calls that will add different tones, cater to specific situations. People might have a kayak or a canoe and the relevant accessories, so like life jackets, paddles, etc. The nice thing about that is it's a relatively affordable way to unlock new places to hunt that you might not be able to access by foot or from land. It also helps with retrieving those those birds, whether it's ducks or geese, because you're able to paddle out and go and get them, so you don't have to rely on either wading out into the water in your waders or trying something else out like a fishing rod. People often buy blinds, which are basically structures that will conceal them. So it could be like a canvas fabric that is camouflage that you're able to tuck grasses into, and that provides additional cover for a variety of situations. And then you could also start to buy fancier ammo types. So certain shot types like bismuth or tungsten are denser than steel and are lethal at longer distances. And then the really nice to have gear, a motorboat. Again, very expensive, but very nice. It allows you to access locations that are even further away. You can even hunt out of the boat. You can transport multiple people. A dog. So a dog is great because a dog will retrieve ducks that would otherwise be really difficult or impossible to reach. And you can always buy more blinds. Um, the last two pages are basically interchangeable. Um, so you'll figure it out as you get further along. What are decoys? There's generally two broad categories, and there are certainly some exceptions to this, but there's generally floating decoys or more land-based decoys. The cheaper version that we'll kind of talk about today are silhouette decoys, which you can see are literally just like a two-dimensional cutout shape of the bird you're targeting, painted like that bird, and you can just stake them into the ground. A floating decoy you'll actually throw out onto the water and will float in the water looking like a duck or a goose on the water. It will have a small anchor coming down. Here, throw it back to me. Greg's gonna bring me a decoy. So this is, let's see if I can see myself. There we go. So this is a floating decoy. You can see it's pretty duck-like. When you see them out floating in the water, I mean, sometimes I'll come across another hunter and I'll see their decoys. And at first I'll think, oh my God, there's a bunch of ducks over there. And then only to find out that they're actually fake plastic or wood ducks. The other thing I'll add is you can see here, I've got another one here. here's this like really beautiful wood hand carved decoy. So there's a long tradition of waterfowl hunting in the US. And so there are these really amazing crafts that have kind of been shaped around waterfowl hunting. And it's turned into an art form. And so if you get further into it, or if you like crafty things, duck hunting is your place, because you'll find all these amazing craftspeople who are out carving decoys from foam or wood, and they're sculptors in their own right. Let's see, questions. Are the blinds the same as for turkey or deer hunting? Where does waterfowl hunting occur typically, public versus private, etc.? So, first question: are the blinds the same as for turkey or deer hunting? Uh, Typically, no. So, if you think of a turkey blind, it might be like a pop-up blind, which is more like a tent. And let me see actually if I have any pictures of a blind setup. So this is a blind that we were hunting out of this week. This is a waterfowl blind, and you can see that it's basically covered up from the front, and then you would be sitting behind the grasses so that the birds can't see you. A turkey blind is going to be more like a pop-up tent that you're sitting inside in. Um, there's a lot of variation to waterfowl blinds, and I'm not going to cover the many different forms that they'll take. But I would say generally, again, very generally speaking, they could be very simple, as in like this one, which is just a panel of fabric, basically. They could be more complicated. Think of like an overbuilt sleeping bag that you lay down in that has like little flip doors so you can lay down and hunt in a really low profile way. And there are many other varieties. And then the let's see. Um, as far as places that you hunt, so I'm going to cover that a little bit right now, actually. You can hunt on both public and private land. In New York State, thankfully, there is a lot of public land hunting opportunities, and it's quite easy to go out and hunt on public land. I would say the majority of the waterfowl hunting that I do in New York State is on public land. And so yeah, I'll get more into that in a second. Felicia's question, do they fly in patterns? Uh yes and no. So like if you think of like geese migrating in like a V formation, that's when they're migrating. So the pattern of them flying, if that's what you mean, they don't really fly in a set pattern. Sometimes you'll have a single bird fly into you. Sometimes you'll have a larger group. And so there's a lot of variation there. And then, yeah. But also, Felicia, if that doesn't fully answer your question, let's come back to it during the Q&A, because I think that would be a great question to pick up on. So, as far as where you go hunting, step number one is you find a location. And so I provided a link to the Kinfolk Hunting's website. There's actually a map there that shows areas where you can hunt in New York State and Connecticut. That includes both public land hunting opportunities and private land opportunities that are open to the public. The other place you can look, I would say, is go to the DEC's website and look at tidal wetland areas. So if you are located in New York City or the New York metropolitan area, there are a lot of tidal wetland areas out on Long Island, and those are great places to go out waterfowl hunting that are totally public. You do have to have a permit to park by them. And so if you visit that URL that I've provided there, you can find the permit that you fill out. It's not an application. You fill it out, it spits it right back to you, and then you leave that in your car when you go to park. But so let's dive in and try to find a location. So this is a screenshot of that hunting location map. I live in Brooklyn, and so for me, hunting out on Long Island is quite close. And so it's an area where I know there's a lot of waterfowl because they kind of fly down there for their overwintering grounds. And yeah, it's close. And so one of those tidal wetland areas I've kind of called out here. This is a place I've hunted before. I'm not saying that this place is any particularly better hunting than some of the other tidal wetland areas out on Long Island, but for the purpose of today's call, we're going to kind of look at this. So if you click on that shape, you can see the name of it, which is Havens Point State Tidal Wetland. There's also a URL to go visit the DEC site there. The first thing I'll do when I'm looking at a site is once I've figured out that it's a public hunting area where I can hunt waterfowl, I will start e-scouting. So I'll look at aerial satellite images, whether it's like Google Maps, Google Earth, like oftentimes I'll even use my phone. Um, I'll use Onyx, other mapping services, and I will kind of look to get a sense of, okay, what looks like habitat that a duck would use. So thinking back to that earlier part of the presentation, let's say I'm targeting mallard ducks. I know that they prefer shallower water. They're going to be feeding on things like vegetation. And so I need to find a spot that will be shallow enough that they can feed, will kind of provide the protection and the habitat that they rely on. So they really live around marshes. And so looking at this place already, I can see we've got a lot of marsh over here, and we've got some marsh over here along with a creek. The next thing I would do is I would look at, there's this great website called eBird. So if you look it up, and I provide a link to it at the end of the presentation, you can actually look at places and see if birders have seen the types of birds that you're trying to pursue in waterfowl hunting. So this is a snapshot of this location. It's not a frequently trafficked birding site, and so this information isn't that reliable, but I provide this screenshot to just give you a sense of it is a thing that you can rely on to understand whether or not the birds that you're targeting have been seen in a location before. And you can see here that Canada geese and mallards, so the two birds that I'm going to target, have been seen there. The next thing I would do is I would scout in person. What does scouting look like for waterfowl hunting? It basically looks like bird watching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive out to a location on maybe a day before the hunt or a few days before the hunt, could be a few weeks before the hunt. And I'm going to walk out onto that site, both for myself to get a sense of the place and what it's like to walk through that area, where I could be setting up, but seeing whether or not there are birds there. If I've decided, okay, yep, there are birds here, this is a place that I'm going to go and hunt, the next thing I would do is go out and hunt it. And so I always start by checking the sunrise and sunset times to understand legal shooting light. In New York State, legal shooting light is generally 30 minutes before sunrise to sunset. And so if the sunrise is 7:08 a.m., that means legal shooting light is 6:38 a.m. And so the next thing I'm going to do after that is I've got a general sense of when I need to be out there. Say I want to do a morning hunt versus an evening hunt, which you can hunt either, but I like to get up in the morning. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the wind and the tides. And so I've looked at the wind forecast, and the wind for tomorrow morning is going to be coming from the northeast. You're going to learn more why that's important in a second. The other kind of rule of thumb that I try to follow is that I try to get to a spot at least an hour before when I want to hunt. So if I want to start hunting at 6:38 a.m. legal shooting light, I want to get there at 5:38 a.m. That allows me to set up my decoys, make sure that I've got a place where I can hide, and then I'm ready and I can be settled for a few minutes before hunting actually starts. And then you hunt. And so what might a setup look like at this place? So this is actually a kind of zoomed in part of this property. And so I'm going to come back a few. So we're looking at this corner over here where you can see my cursor is. And let's say I chose that corner because I walked out there and I saw a lot of ducks kind of congregating at the mouth of this creek. So I'm going to go out there. And if you remember, I looked at the wind, and the wind is going to be coming from the northeast. meaning you can see that arrow kind of indicating the wind direction. So I'm going to set up on this marsh right here. And the reason for that is I know the birds want to be here. I'm going to throw some decoys out. Basically, if I'm sitting here looking out into the ocean, they're to my left and they're upwind of me. The reason for that is ducks, waterfowl generally, they're kind of like planes. They like to land into the wind. And so if I set these decoys to the upwind side of me, they're going to fly in. And those decoys are going to kind of be a backstop. They're not going to fly over those decoys and then land, generally speaking. So they're going to come in. And my goal is to have them landing kind of in this pocket. And you'll see I've got these red dots on the screen. Those red dots are indicating the number of decoys I have set up, which in this case, we're looking at the must-have gear kind of scenario. And so this is assuming I've got 6 decoys. So I'll put a few off to my left, so that upwind side, and then I've got one down there, and it creates this little pocket in front of me. And so I'm going to hunt, and we're going to see how it goes. And hopefully on that day, it turns out really well. And this is what happens. You're able to pull back a bunch of geese, bunch of brant, sorry. And the thing I would really encourage is that there's a lot of kind of learning by experience with waterfowl hunting. So first of all, I would try to find somebody who has waterfowl hunted before and go out with them, because you're going to learn kind of like the do's and don'ts in a much faster way than if you try and do it yourself. But the other thing I'll say is that because it's a real, like, it's a learning experience, every time you go out, even if you don't succeed in getting ducks, you're going to learn something. And so I think there's a lot of utility in just going out and trying it and see what happens, so that you can kind of treat it as like an iterative learning process. So you go out, you try something, okay, that didn't work. Okay, now I'm going to try this differently the next time. Maybe I'm going to put all my decoys up here, or I'm going to put a few more down here. That type of feedback loop is really, really helpful. Finally, I just want to point to some additional resources that are out there relevant to waterfowl hunting. So there's some great conservation organizations that focus specifically on waterfowl. So there's Ducks Unlimited, there's Delta Waterfowl. I would also highly encourage everyone to take the New York State DEC Waterfowl ID course, which I provided the sign up link for, as it allows you to better identify waterfowl, which is really a crucial skill as you get further into this. I've also provided some basic information on how you clean a duck for cooking, and that link to an e-scouting page. And so that's it. We can take some time for questions and, excuse me, discussion. Why early morning? So I generally hunt early morning because birds are moving from the roost out to their feeding locations. And if I'm able to find a feeding location, then I can kind of better predict where those birds are going to be. And I know that they're going to move to that feeding location at that time of day. That said, I don't always hunt first thing in the morning. Sometimes I'll hunt later in the day or in the evening. If you're hunting in a place like Long Island, the tides will actually often dictate when you want to hunt a place. And so sometimes you can't even hunt a location at low tide because there's no water there. And so maybe I'll go and hunt that afternoon in that spot in an afternoon. Are we going to eat all those geese? And so actually I will note those are actually all brant, Atlantic brant. And yes, we do eat all of those brant and they are delicious. How do you identify a feeding location? So again, this is where you have to do a little bit of research on what are the specific species you're targeting. So a feeding location for a mallard will differ from a feeding location for a goose. Sometimes there is some overlap. But I'll start with, okay, what am I targeting? Try to do a little bit of research to understand what are the things that those birds kind of rely on for food out in the landscape. And then I'll go look for those landscape features like marshes, and I'll start there. And then after that, this is where you kind of just have to spend time out in the field. I will just go around looking for birds, seeing if they're feeding. And if I observe birds feeding in a specific spot, I know it's a feeding location. So uh, lost my train of thought a little bit. It does really require a willingness to go out and scout, because you just won't find the success that you're hoping for if you're not spending that time beforehand to really find those locations where the waterfowl actually want to be before you go out there. Are you using any optics to help identify? Yes, oftentimes when I'm scouting, I'll have binoculars with me just so I can, if there are ducks out at a further distance, I can identify them and really observe them without disturbing them. What is the best tasting bird? Yeah, Greg put typically puddlers are tastier than divers. I would agree with that. I think my favorite bird is that I've had so far is a pintail, because they'll only eat seeds. They won't eat crustaceans, whereas things like black ducks, especially if you're hunting in like more coastal environments, they could sometimes eat shellfish, and so that will affect the flavor of the fat on waterfowl. That said, I think they're all delicious. Like wood ducks, mallards, black ducks, teal, they're all quite delicious. And yeah. Can you use other parts of waterfowl? Down, feathers? Yes, absolutely. So, especially if you are into fly fishing, you can reuse those feathers and you can use them to tie flies that you can then go fishing with, which is a really satisfying experience. To, let's say, like go fishing for bluefish or striped bass in the summer, using feathers from a duck you harvested in the winter before. It's a really kind of amazing feedback loop. And then down, yes, there are definitely people who will use the down you can make like down pillows and stuff. It is a lot of work. You have to wash it. There's a lot of care that goes into it. I personally haven't made any down pillows, but I do aspire to at some point. Let's see. Do you ever bring waterfowl gear with you while hunting or fishing if you know it's legal to take advantage of an opportunity for waterfowl? No. The reason for that is there is, as I mentioned, there's a lot of gear that's required. And so if I'm out fishing, I don't want to lug waterfowl gear around with me, especially like decoys and stuff, just because it's kind of a pain in the butt. But sometimes, I'll be out waterfowl hunting, and then later that day I could go trout fishing on a stream somewhere, but I generally don't try and do them at the same time.
Wait, I'm gonna chime in on that actually, because Tim and I literally went September goose hunting in Connecticut, and basically we weren't exactly bringing fly fishing gear with us, like to the river, but we went fly fishing right after. Like I think we goose hunted, didn't see geese, and then I was like, okay, great. Well, I'm already down here. I went up and grabbed a rod and fished instead. And similarly, like I know people who will float rivers similarly with a shotgun and then fish. And then Tim, you did that too as well up in New York, like where you went fly fishing on the river up on like the sort of like upstate Albany, Delaware system, and like also then went goose hunting while after fly fishing as well. So it's definitely something you can do, but it depends on the season. And it's not for everyone. Like it's a lot of stuff to drag around. But this is all preference. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think the one distinction I'll add there is that I don't do them at the same time. Like I will do one and then I'll do the other, but again, because of that gear equation, I generally am not like fishing and then having a shotgun next to me in the event that I have like geese fly by. But a fair point. Uh, any other questions?
Hello. Sorry if you already went over this, but I was curious about using crossbow versus muzzle loader, if there's like any significant difference or if you would suggest over the other.
So for waterfowl hunting specifically, people are generally going out with shotguns, just because when you're targeting these animals, they're flying, and so you need to have a kind of like spread of shot. And so for one, I'm just going to caveat, which is that I haven't read the regs for this. I don't know if waterfowl hunting with archery equipment is legal in New York State. And then number two, I would say there are some people who will use a muzzle loading shotgun, but it is very, very, very rare. And so I would highly encourage you, if you're interested in waterfowl hunting, not to use archery equipment. Again, not knowing the regulations for it in New York State, around archery equipment specifically. But I would not encourage a muzzleloader because it takes a long time to reload. A muzzleloading shotgun is also very rare to find. And so I would say if you're not able, but you should really be at waterfowl hunting with a shotgun, especially because it allows you to take multiple shots, which is pretty imperative when you're waterfowl hunting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Tim, sorry, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Please jump in.
I know, it's just we're talking about shotguns and you live in Brooklyn and I live in the city, and sometimes I'm thinking when you go upstate, you don't need a license for a shotgun, but things are a little different in the city. So it was a little intimidating to go through the process, and I'm thinking, okay, I might just go through it, but I don't know how comfortable you feel just transporting the shotgun.
So I am fortunate enough to have a car, and and I got a car largely in part because of how much I was hunting. And so I feel fairly comfortable moving back and forth with a firearm because it's in my car. Um, and I keep it safely stored. So there are legal requirements for how you store a firearm in New York State and New York City. And so if you adhere by those requirements, you're generally being a pretty safe firearm owner. That's not to say that the process is not intimidating. I like totally agree. It's a very intimidating process to get the New York City rifle shotgun permit. But if it's something that you're interested in, I do encourage it. Um, that said, if you're interested in waterfowl hunting and you're like, is this something I want to do? By no means am I saying you should go out and get the permit so that you can buy a shotgun to go waterfowl hunting. There are plenty of people, especially within the Kinfolk organization, who have the equipment to bring people out hunting. And so I would highly encourage talking with some of those individuals to try out hunting before you take the leap to get a permit. And if you do decide that you want to commit to it and get the permit, by all means, go for it. Follow all the rules and regulations that come with firearm ownership in New York City. But personally, I feel quite comfortable with it because of those rules and regulations. They're quite safe, and then also I take what I consider to be common sense steps for ensuring the safety of that equipment.
Tim, I got a question about dogs.
Hit me. I
Uh,
love talking about dogs.
Do you have any recommendations? Because I'm interested in a pointer of how to, say, qualify a dog to then take him out safely and make it worth your time as well as the dog's time and anybody else that you might encounter.
Can Can I ask a clarifying question? So are you thinking about specifically for waterfowl hunting or just hunting more generally?
Like upland birds as well as waterfowl. And so if its primary job was for upland birds to make sure that that dog is ready to go, do you come across that with other people that you're out with? And how do you do that safely so you don't disrupt other hunters as well or their dogs?
Um, it's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it is is about trust. And so if let's say I'm going out hunting with somebody who I haven't met before, I'd probably try to find some time to get to know them first and like see their dog and like understand their temperament before I commit to going out hunting with that person, just so that I get a sense of whether the dog is capable and kind of what the person's relationship is with the animal to make sure that the animal is going to be safe. We're all going to be safe, and that we're going to be able to do it in an enjoyable way. Um, there's kind of like additional layers. So for one, there's like no real like qualifications that people will look for. I think it's a lot of like gut check stuff. But one thing that I found to be really helpful is that there's a lot of um, kind of like dog breed specific groups that are great training resources and will kind of give you a sense as to whether or not your dog is going to be up for the task of going out hunting. And so if you look at websites like the American Kennel Club, they'll be able to provide resources and connections to those individuals so that you can go out and train with them. And those people will be able to give you that kind of feedback, um, and let you know whether they think your dog is going to be up for the task.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
One other follow-up question. Are there typically like flotation device regulations that you have to, yeah,
Yeah. So,
for your dogs, I meant, sorry.
oh, for the dogs.
Yeah.
I did not that I'm aware of, but what I can say is once you get into like honestly even October, November, like the water can get colder, and so like Cedar, my dog, he's a lab. Like he loves to swim. He can swim forever. The thing that's actually more of an issue is the water temperature. And so he'll wear like a neoprene vest, which is like a wetsuit basically for those
Mhm.
colder water temperatures. And so I'm more thinking about hypothermia and
Yeah.
keeping them warm
Mhm.
um, than I am necessarily thinking about flotation. And again, I think first and foremost, I'm always trying to think of the welfare of my dog and making sure that he's in a safe environment. And so if he's ever swimming into a place where I don't feel like he's going to be safe, I take him out of that because I don't want to subject him to that
Okay.
and
Yeah.
potentially get him in trouble.
Great. Thank you. That'll help me get started.
Let's see, there's some questions in the chat. I'll add one other thing, going back to the question about firearm ownership in New York City. It is definitely tricky. And when you look at the application requirements, it can seem like a real hurdle, but we are going to be doing a talk at some point about how one navigates that. Um, because I know for people who are increasingly getting more and more involved in hunting, and if you live in New York City, it can seem like a really daunting task. Um, and once you go through it, you realize it's not. And if you do it in a kind of common sense way, it really unlocks a lot of opportunities for you as far as hunting in the New York metropolitan area and beyond, even. One other thing I'll add about that too is like, let's say you live in New York City and then you want to, this is less relevant, I guess, for waterfowl hunting, though it could apply. So you want to travel out west to go hunting. you can then fly through a New York City airport if you have that license and the appropriate documentation for the firearms that you're traveling with. Whereas if you don't have those permits, you can't be flying through those airports. But anyways, that's for a later date. Any other questions on the presentation on waterfowl hunting, how to get started? Brandon, Greg, you guys have any questions?
Thanks so much, Tim. I was just gonna say maybe we'll throw something in. Just want to make a huge pitch. Waterfowl hunting is like if I could only do two things in my entire life outdoors, it would be like it would be bird hunting, which would include waterfowl hunting and turkey hunting and fly fishing. And that's for me personally.
That's
All of
three
this is
things.
personal. No, those are two buckets. Those are two buckets. But like waterfowl hunting is like absolutely like my favorite type of one of, if not my favorite type of hunting. Like it is like it is so dynamic. It is so fun. It's like the only type of hunting you get to like sit in a blind with people next to you, talking, laughing, making jokes, missing, sometimes not missing, and feeling like, yeah, I know some things. But also it's just like it's a very dynamic, very active form of hunting that's like pretty distinct from like any other thing that we do in the woods, as Tim was mentioning. So I just want to like make a huge echo. It's a lot of details, a lot of things here, but like it's a lot of fun. I think also like if you come waterfowl hunting once, like you'll probably not want to do anything else because you're just like, well, this is what I want to do with my life. Um, and so just a huge pitch. It is like super fun, and like the work and everything involved is like what makes that so much more rewarding when you get this wild animal to come in from the sky of all the places it could be into like 30 to 40 yards in your distance
Because you're talking to it.
because you're calling to it, yeah, to say like come see me. It really is like an amazing thing to have happen. And so like just a huge reiteration, like it is super fun, and like I highly recommend everyone's call like come down and do it because it really is like, yeah, I mean,
It encompasses scouting, which is trying to figure out where the animal's going to be, building forts, which is super fun because you go out into the marsh and you try to figure out how you're going to hide from these birds. So you're often concocting little shelters to hide yourself, making noises and talking to birds, even if you don't know how to do it very well. It's beside the point. Putting out decoys and trying to guess, like, okay, what are they going to think it looks real or not? And then shooting, like wing shooting, which is someone mentioned uh, muzzle loaders and crossbows. That's aiming. Wing shooting is like something moving through the air. You're usually hitting them in the air as they're flying really fast. So it's just super engaging in all levels. And as Brandon mentioned, deer hunting, you'll sit in the wood. I love deer hunting too, but that's a solo activity where you're sitting in the woods quietly for 4 or 5 hours. This is like you're sitting there talking and we're just like joking around, having a good time, and then someone's like, ducks, 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 ducks. It's super fun. So sounds very serious with all the rules and regulations and gear, and it is more complicated than most other forms of hunting, but it is as you start to figure it out, it becomes more and more of a blast.
Tim, what's your favorite part about waterfowl hunting?
I gotta mute myself.
It's a good question. I mean, I love all of it. I think it's one of those things where, again, I started like, if you think about it through the gear lens, I started on like the must-have front, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get 6 decoys and I'm gonna go out. And that was recently. Like, I only started waterfowl hunting in 2021. And then I got totally bit by the bug. I got bit by the going out to landscapes that I would never otherwise visit. So, like walking around in marshes and swamps and places that really feel like the last vestiges of wilderness in the Northeast. Feels like places that people haven't been to. I love, as these guys talked about, I love the animals. I love the fact that there are these birds that are coming from far-flung locations, and then I'm interacting with them in this like one fleeting moment. And I use that kind of picture of the the Russian nested dolls, because I feel like that's how it's kind of played out for me. Whereas I'm attracted to it for like this one thing, like that outer doll. And then I open it up and I'm like, oh my God, now I like it because of this. And now, like, if you ask me about why I love waterfowl hunting, it's like, well, I love watching my dog work. And I think that's like one of the most fun things. It's not to say that's the only reason I like it. It's just every passing year that I waterfowl hunt, I find a new thing I love about it. And it's not a thing I loved about it the last year or 2 years ago. And that dynamism, that kind of like ever evolving relationship I have with the thing is what keeps me coming back year after year. And it's I'm going to be doing it for the rest of my life. And I've spent way too much of my money on it now at this point, but I will continue to do that because I love it so much. Recommended books on waterfowl hunting. Oh, that is a great question. I don't know if I've read any good books on waterfowl hunting, but Brandon might.
Did drop in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. So Brandon has a Long Island recommendation that he's gonna drop into the chat.
It's pretty deep, but the good thing is that after you read it though, you'll have a much better understanding. And it's something that like I found in like a library online because I was like really trying to understand the tides, which is like something that, you know, is complicated. And also like as a new coastal waterfowler, I was like, how the hell do you like predict this tides and how do you hunt them? And like this is like an old school, it was written in like the 70s. And it's really good though, just breaking it down of like, here's how I think about tides and here's how I hunt this area. And like it's a good basic just for Long Island. I think YouTube and also like duck hunting forums like are really great places to start for just like basic information. The New Hunter's Guide is a YouTube series I would highly recommend because it covers everything from scouting to shooting to like patterning your firearm to like finding birds. I also think the Delta podcast on Spotify. I think the DU podcast, especially in an area that you live or that you're thinking of hunting, is another good resource because they have specialists and guides who go on there that just basically talk about how they find birds. It's another good resource. And then I think, yeah, really like talking to like individuals that are like doing it and joining local like waterfowl forums. Yeah. But I'll send that book.
Yes, we will. So we're going to follow up with this presentation and post it to the website. So all of these resources are going to be listed out. So do not feel like you have to remember them all now. They are going to be living for some time up on the Kinfolk site. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'm going to kick it over to Brandon, who's going to wrap us up. But thank you, everybody. I appreciate everyone taking some time to hear me drone on about waterfowl hunting. Would love to keep talking with any and all who are interested in it and find some time to get out into the marsh together. Over to you, Brandon.
So I don't know. Did anyone hear that? I don't know if they heard it. You got to hit it at the end.
I will.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a huge round of applause for Tim. If you got virtual hands, here to say. Yeah, no, I think one of the coolest things about waterfowling as well that we sort of mentioned in that is that like I feel like unlike any other type of hunting, like I grew up hunting in like a family that hunted forever. And like it was like something that was passed on to me from my like uncles and grandparents and aunts. And I feel like I met so many people who become lifelong friends. Like Tim and I met and really became, I think, friends literally after like shooting archery one day in an archery range down in Brooklyn and then being like, you want to go duck hunting in this marsh in the middle of nowhere, Connecticut? I was like, yeah, I'll see you there tomorrow at 3 a.m. at a boat launch. And you know, I feel like it is one of those things that I think goes unspoken, but I feel like it is one of the most powerful parts of hunting and of like waterfowling. I think specifically is that it's so dynamic and it requires so much trust and it's so just like raw. Like I think it's like the most real thing that you'll ever do, right? Like you're out in the water and you're out in the rain and you're out in the it's 20 degrees out. You're like, this is perfect. The birds are gonna be cold, we're gonna be cold, the wind is blowing, the birds are gonna be coming to this place that we thought is a nice sanctuary, and like we're standing in chest deep water. in the middle of the dark trying to get these birds to come into us. It's like it doesn't get any realer than that. And so like there's a lot of trust, like is what I guess what I'm trying to get to is that like inherently like it's a process that's involved with like a lot of experience and a lot of trust. And also like it's a lot of just like really amazing times to like kind of get to know people in a way that you would never do, you know, getting a drink or just like getting a coffee somewhere. And I think it is one of the things that really allows you to sort of like build a new community of like hunters, friends, and like really like family. And so I feel like for that, for so many reasons, you know, waterfowling is, as Tim said, something I will do for the rest of my life. And I'm really thankful because I think it's made some of the people in my life who I want and will be in my life forever that like I met this way, like all these people in this room and all the people involved in kinfolk. And so, as a final pitch, waterfowling is incredible. If you ever want to talk about the addiction, we'll be doing it for the next 54 days, as many days as I can left in the season. And yeah, it's going to be absolutely awesome. And so you can follow Kinfolk Hunting Collective on Instagram at Kinfolk Hunting. You can also find us on online at Kinfolk Hunting Collective, and also kinfolkhunting.org. You can email us. We're going to send out this information and also upload it to our website, so you can get all of that as well for the books and all the other information. But yeah, seriously, I mean, at the very core of it though is that if you have any interest, if you're like someone who has been doing it for a while and wants to get more people into it, we're always looking for new mentors, new communities, new connections, to really expand more programming. And so even if it's like you know someone who has land that might have good waterfowling access, contact us. But yeah, and I feel like it's one of the things that like we are trying to actively like figure out how to get more people into like wherever you all are from the call. Like I live up on the border of like Harlem and the Upper East Side, and you know it is still like something that I make dedicated time and energy to like go out and waterfall. And like I feel like it is something that speaks volumes to me, and it speaks volumes to a lot of other people who do it once. So thank you all so much for coming. And
Let me add one thing.
yeah, tag us on Instagram if you like take pictures or share anything. Feel free to tag us on Instagram. Hit any one of us all individually up as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I typed in the chat that we are going to be trying to take people out. It's obviously a little more complicated than deer hunting because of all the stuff we just talked about. But most of us have extra sets of waders and shotguns, and some of us have boats, not me, but some of us have boats. And we have, you know, some of our group likes to hunt up in the Hudson Valley, kind of along the Hudson River. Some of us like to go more to Long Island. So we're trying to figure out how to take people out. We will communicate through the list. If you're not in our WhatsApp, please join it. We'll send a link out to that as well. Because that's another way we can communicate, but we're gonna be taking people out, and you don't have to be too concerned right now about all even the must-haves, you know, gear, because we can get you started.
Yeah. Huge shout out to Tim again. Thank you. MVP of the night. Yeah, and also Tim will upload his slides too. So this will be recorded, but the slides will be also available on the Kinfolk page.
Yep.
Yeah, and feel free, like, you know, all of our personal Instagrams and stuff, we can drop into that email or something too. So if you have questions for any people individually, feel free to reach out. I think, yeah, I mean, Greg's up in Hudson Valley. I'm in New York City. Tim's in New York City. We hunt literally all over. We're in Maine. We hunt from Maine to Jersey. Not that much Jersey, but
Not that much Maine.
yeah, not that much Maine either, but once a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to hit us up. So thank you so much. Thanks all for coming.